1574 to 1595. In the beginning, the Arctic was composed of 4 main islands. The first of which being Alexander Island. The second, which is also the smallest, is called Mitchell Island. The second, which is also the biggest, is called Gregory Island. And the second smallest is called Ross Island. The first Arctic colony was founded by Alexis Smith in 1574 on Alexander Island. After a year, they sent out colonists to go build 2 more settlements at the end of each river connecting to the main city. And after the third city was founded, they exercised a zone of military control around all 3 cities. Eventually, they also founded a 4th city at another river much more far away. During their expeditions, they found out a barbarian camp was nearby. In the beginning, they were peaceful, but as tensions rose, war broke out. The Plains Nation did a flanking maneuver to surround the barbarian armies and capture their camp behind their backs, which proved successful as the barbarians didn't know what was going on. With improved military tactics, the barbarians were obliterated in the main battles. After being surrounded, they took heavy casualties and were pushed to a corner of the hill. In the end, they were kicked off. After the war with the barbarians ended, the Plains Nation annexed the barbarian city, which they included into the zone of military control, which eventually was extended to the faraway colony. Also, they ended up founding another city much more far north in a secluded area. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Arctic, the other nations colonized fast, expanding at lightning speed to get the most out of what they can. But some were too close and ended with war. Desert Nation and Winter Nations troops started doing skirmishes near the border, which ended into a full-blown conflict after the Desert Nation built a fort near one of the battle scenes. Eventually, they were able to outflank the Winter Nation and inflict heavy casualties on the right flank. The right flank eventually was defeated, and the left flank retreated into the city, which was put under siege that lasted several months. But eventually, the city gave out, and the Desert Nation put under control. On the other side of the Arctic, the Plains Nation attacked the Jungle Nation colony that was in the area. The Jungle Nation at first pulled their troops towards the city to defend, but it was a futile effort as the Plains Nation attacked. Eventually, they were able to outflank the Jungle Nation and take their city behind their backs, such as they did to the barbarians. And their army surrendered right after. 1594 to 1669. In the east, colonization continued, but much more slowly. But it continued nevertheless, as more cities were founded, especially by the Winter Nation, to be able to get control of extensive resources. But during one of the mining operations, they hit a magma patch which caused a volcano to explode, which ended up in a giant swath of land being submerged under the water after a 9.2 earthquake. After 4 days, the earthquake stopped and the rivers were formed. Meanwhile, in the west, the Plains Nation took heavy control of the southeastern part of the island, but there were several areas where the barbarians were a nuisance. One of which was near a mountain, which ended in a brutal war against the Plains Nation. The Plains Nation was able to break through the lines on the northeastern part and then after the northwestern part, claiming one of the settlements. After that, the one in the south also fell, and the rest of the barbarians surrendered. And shortly after, both settlements were turned into a mining colony to mine the resources out of the mountain. Meanwhile, at the other barbarian settlements on the other side of the island, war broke out against the Plains Nation. War was first was slow, but eventually the Plains Nation made sufficient progress in encircling and in separating both settlements. Eventually they surrendered and were accepted into the colonies. After the war with the barbarians, expansion was fast for most nations. Most founded more colonies and exercised more areas of control, especially the Plains Nation, after they built a fort and several areas of military controls around their settlements. But after that period of aggressive expansion, The barbarians united in one army and started attacking all the nations. At first, they only attacked the Jungle Nation in main offensive operations, but the war was slowly bogged down as the barbarians weren't properly coordinated. But nevertheless, the barbarians broke through the Jungle Nation lines and expanding far south, but because of that, their armies were overstretched and they lost the initiative on the right side. Eventually, the left side also fell as morale dropped fast. And only in a span of few months after that, lots of things happened. Most notably, a desert fortress was captured in the north side of Gregory Island, and the Plains Nation built a settlement to prevent the barbarians from entering the heartland of the colony. As the Winter Nation saw that the wars were brutal, they built many industrial cities along the rivers near the area that was sunken underwater, as well as the Plains Nation expanding their area of influence near the border settlements of the barbarians. After the Jungle Nation and one of the barbarian camps made a peace treaty, the Jungle Nation annexed one and then after the rest of the barbarians in the north. 1669 to 1756. Shortly after New Year, most barbarians signed peace treaties with the colonies that were near them and that were war with them. Right after, the Plains Nation ended up building dozens of new settlements to fully control the south of the island. Meanwhile, on Ross Island, an illegal Plains Nation colony was attacked by the Winter Nation. During the siege, the colony sent out garrisons to lift the siege. Eventually, they ended up succeeding and were able to break the right lines. Eventually, they sent out half their forces to go capture the nearby city to be able to outflank and gain control of the area. But after the loss of the city, the forces that were continuing the siege retreated to the other colonies on the island. 1756 to 1813. Shortly after the loss of the east side of Ross Island, the Winter Nation was able to regain one of the colonies that the Plains Nation has founded. Eventually, the rest fell quickly after not having enough garrisons. As well, in the north of Gregory Island, the Desert Nation built another settlement and were able to lift the siege of their fort. After the Winter Nation fully conquered the south, they had enough morale to go and conquer the barbarians in the north, which they succeeded. After that, the rest of the nations followed suit and captured the rest of the barbarians. Meanwhile, on the north of Gregory Island, after a territorial dispute with the Jungle Nation, the Desert Nation captured their colonies there and they took full control of the north. The founding fathers of each first colony of each nation. For the Plains Nation, it was Alexis Smith. For the Desert Nation, it was Philip Gries. For the Jungle Nation, it was Michael Kraut. And for the winter colonies, it was a group of militias from Georgesville that moved there after the village was burned down during the Winter Nation Civil War that happened only a few years before they moved there. Alright, come back next week to see the next episode, and like and subscribe.